Hi there. I'm Diana Montford, the world's first transgender television journalist. Born male became female, just to clarify that. I'll just say I'm non binary, and that takes care of the whole enchilada. I've never heard it called an enchilada before. But anyway, my guest is New York politician Mr. Patrick Bobilin, and we are going to be discussing rent forgiveness. Now, this doesn't only apply to New York, it applies to the entire nation. Many people have not been able to pay their rent for most of 2020 and 2021. And, suddenly this huge rent bill is going to come due. People are out of work. What are they going to do? I mean, we also have to forgive, in my opinion, landlords' property taxes and their mortgages to make rent forgiveness viable. Anyway, my guest, Mr. I'm sorry, I keep saying Peter. I don't know why I keep saying that. Mr. Patrick Bobilin. Patrick, I'm sorry I keep calling you Peter. I have no idea why.
That's okay. It happens from time to time. But thank you, Diana, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk about the crisis, the housing crisis we're in. But I'm proud to know that more and more people are taking things seriously. Not only you by talking about this on your show, but as we speak right now, Bernie Sanders is fighting alongside Ed Markey in the Senate to ensure that we get a $2,000 stimulus up from the Nancy Pelosi introduced original $600 stimulus. $2,000 covers a month's rent, $600 does not. And
Exactly.
so it's very exciting that, the Overton window shifted virtually overnight. And, we have people who are in office willing to take things seriously.
By the way, we are shooting this show on December 29th, 2020, so things may change by the time you see this. Hopefully, the $2,000 stimulus package will have been approved. As it stands now, as we shoot, as we go to press, Mitch McConnell, of all the charmers, has decided that he does not want the $2,000 stimulus package because it is too much. Plutocrats are not known for their generosity. That's how they become plutocrats. Patrick, what do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of people in the position of elected leadership, a lot of people who have the privilege of being upper class, oligarchs, have a pretty twisted conception of the value of things and how
Excuse me.
much should be offered, and that's changed a lot over time. There was a marginal tax rate 50 years ago that reached 70, 80, 90% of earned income. These days, you have people who are earning millions of dollars, or who are earning, millions of dollars in income a year, that aren't being taxed any higher of a rate than people who are making $30,000 a year.
Someone
And
said that $600 is a rich person's idea of what is a great deal of money to a poor person.
I
That
think that's a
I
that's a
think
good
that's
point.
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something we forget as well is that, people like Mitch McConnell don't have most of their wealth is not based on their income. Supposedly, an elected official at least in the congressional level, I think makes 200, maybe $300,000 a year max. And somehow there are so many millionaires in office. Well, it's because they make their money off of investments, and investments go up and down. And what I think a lot of people need to learn and realize is that housing, home ownership, especially in a city like New York, where 70% of New Yorkers are renting, it's an investment, and investments go up and investments go down. And there's something about the housing lobby right now that makes, even the most, awful, rapacious Wall Street brokers seem friendly, as the landlord lobby kicks and screams when we tell them, hey, your investment has gone down. Fewer people want to live in New York. People can't afford to live in New York. So this quote unquote market rate that you seem, desperately, religiously tied to has nothing to do with reality anymore. So, when we're canceling rent, um, we're saying that, this investment isn't as valuable as you thought it was when you and whoever got together and started an LLC.
Now, they cannot throw two-thirds of New York or two-thirds of the nation out of their homes, because if they do that and they don't give people money for food, then people have nothing to lose. And that's when revolution happens. And
Right.
these people are dancing on the lip of the volcano, the plutocrats. They do not realize that they are living in France, 1789, in Russia,
Hmm.
1917. People are fed up. You cannot grind people down and expect them to say, thank you, sir, because that's
But I
not going to
think,
happen.
yeah, the biggest difference we have though is, the sort of American spirit of there's a famous quote that I don't even know who it's attributed to, but something along the lines that, poor people in America see themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Many people feel on the cusp of such great wealth without even the mere conception of what $1 billion seems, that, or $1 billion actually is. They have no real lived conception of what that is. Yet they fear, they project themselves into the lives of billionaires and fear the idea of raising taxes on them, as if it will trickle down and mean something to their own, sort of earned income.
Well,
And
it's very.
so,
Yes? No, you were saying?
this is why, when we talk about canceling rent and mortgages, there's a lot of resistance because, the people, it's much like the conversations about universal health care. Who do we have arguing against universal health care? Well, first thing, you have wealthy people in positions of power who are privileged. And then, you have television pundits who are actually willingly parroting, these criticisms of universal health care, because they fear that they will have to have the same kind of health care that a poor person does. So they're lobbying against it for their own, personal
Let me
worries.
tell you something. I live on the Upper East Side, and so do you. A
Mhm.
woman who lives on the Upper East Side, who is my neighbor, when I said we have to have universal health care, said to me in all seriousness, oh no, it's terrible. We would have to wait 6 months for a doctor. When I told her, well, 6 months is better than not at all, she did not get it. She's very rich, and she doesn't understand that, people need medical care. It's a right, not a privilege.
Right. Well, and these people who are very wealthy have a very strange, selective way of applying supply side economics in their head, and when they want to project right wing talking points. If there's universal health care, suddenly you've opened up the market to more people who need health care, which means that more people will want to be doctors and will need to hire more doctors. So we wouldn't have the same uh, healthcare infrastructure that we have now. But when you're talking about great paradigm shifts, it's much like anything in history. It's the women's right to vote, the concept of prohibition, the ending of chattel slavery. All of these things seem impossible to conceive through eyes hardened by the contemporary condition, and those who've seen a lot of benefits and see a lot of positives in their life thanks to the contemporary condition, and they don't want to upset that.
Well,
And so they'll fight kicking and screaming, much like these landlords and wealthy real estate developers who are seeing the value of their housing drop. That's economics. They understand economics, and that's why they invested in the first place. But when you apply economics to their actual investments, they can't stand it.
well, as you know, I'm transgender, And the idea pre 1969, pre Stonewall, of gay people being accepted would have been like saying today child molesters or serial killers or something. But at some point, the oligarchy, i.e., the advertisers, the corporate world, realized that, hey, wait a minute, there are all these gay people and they have all this money. We should be nice to them, so they buy our products.
Well, and they have,
Duh.
at the time they have no children. Also, they couldn't adopt, or and so yeah, you have two adults in a household with no money to spend on children.
That's not necessarily true. Many gay people today are actually legally married and or have children. So
yes,
that
yes, yes. But
has
I'm saying
changed.
during the 80s and early 90s, there were so many laws against having adoption for gay couples.
Or using a surrogate or
Discrimination.
something. But back to the rent. Now, what are people going to do when this huge rent bill comes due and they can't hope to pay it? They can't hope to. I mean,
Right.
they've been out of work for a long time, or they're underemployed. They, I mean, what they can barely afford food, much less rent.
Right.
What are they going to do?
Well, sadly, there aren't a lot of options. We're relying on our elected officials and leadership to do something about this, to solve this issue, because exactly, you can't, as they say, squeeze blood from a stone. So if people don't have the money to pay rent today, there's no guarantee they're going to be able to pay that plus 6 months of rent 6 months later with no income. And that's why we need to have the sort of grown-up conversation about canceling rent. I think a lot of people are tied to this idea that you can't just give stuff away, but we contribute in tax dollars to a functioning society that provides roads, schools, transportation, so that when we need it, when we need this to survive, we can provide for the people. That's
And
what
not only
social
that, but
services fundamentally are.
and think of
Um,
foreign aid. The other countries are
exactly,
getting aid from us. How about helping ourselves?
exactly. I mean, that was sort of the Trump's sort of right wing critique of the original tax bill, in just right before Christmas, this year in 2020. Um, was that we were giving all this foreign aid and we weren't, helping Americans, and so therefore we should, give people a $2,000 check.
Well, I
And
never thought I'd
this,
agree with Trump, but he has a
yeah,
point.
a broken clock is right twice a day, right? Um, so, that's why you have a lot of people talking about taxing the rich, and so much in New York City, especially in New York State, taxing the rich comes down to taxing our closing a lot of the loopholes in real estate and making it, admitting that it's a human right, and that, if we want a healthy, functioning society, we have to provide people with the ability to have the bare minimum level of housing, and access to housing.
But don't the rich often dehumanize the poor and the rich live in their own rich person's bubble and think, well, too bad for them. They're not human the way we're human.
Right.
And, I mean, this is so Marie Antoinette. And
Right.
really, I mean, it keeps happening century after, they just don't get it. And they think their guards will protect them, and they forget that the guards come from the people and are not going to fire on their friends and families. And
Right.
they make the same mistake over and over and over and over again.
Well, a lot of this comes from 60 years of changes to our tax law that have made them friendlier to the wealthy, and increased the wealth of the shrinking number of people, who have it at the top, and the growing underclass, while the middle class has been squeezed out. I mean, one of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize, and I was doing a little bit of research before our conversation today, is that since 1981, we don't use full market value when assessing property taxes. We use quote unquote assessed value. And this might seem, like a small technicality, but the difference between market value in New York and assessed value is assessed value has a legislated limitation. The assessed value of a home can only be increased a maximum of 6% every year, and that would be with a limit of 20% over 4 years. Now, stay with me for a second. In 20 years, housing costs have almost quadrupled around the city. That's 400%. Meanwhile, assessed value has a cap and can only have gone up 100% for 20 years ago. If you add, 5 times 4, 20, of those 20% together. And so your housing assessed value has grown a bit, but your market value has gone through the roof. So people are paying more in property taxes without a doubt than they were 20 years ago, but they're only paying, relatively speaking, 1/4 of what they're actually earning when it comes to rent market value. And that's why you're seeing right now this wacky thing where landlords and real estate companies are giving away months of free rent to try to get people into their housing in places like the Upper East Side, where people are leaving in droves. And part of that is because if they change the market value of their apartment, say they have a studio apartment for $2,000, they give away 2 months rent. That seems like a good deal over the course of a year to a renter, but they keep that 2,000 mark because if they lower that market rate value, then overall their investment starts to crumble and it does damage, to the other property values in the area, et cetera, et cetera. So they want to keep that market value in the same place. So, things could get so bad that they're willing to give away 6 months of free rent. So as long as they can put a price tag on it that says $2,000, even though they're only charging you the equivalent of $1,000 a month, it's goofy math, and there are all these loopholes. And who benefits from this but the wealthiest? And who pays? The 70% of New Yorkers who are renting.
Well, so many people say that, well, if we tax the rich will move out. But who cares? I mean, let them move, because if they're not providing money anyway, who cares,
Yeah, if the rich were going to move out, like, boo-hoo, I just don't buy this. Why are there so many vacant towers all throughout New York, all throughout Manhattan, and especially on the Upper East Side? People have, what's called a pied-à-terre, which is an unoccupied apartment that they have because they know that it increases in value and it's an investment for them that, is pretty reliable. If on top of that, if you're a billionaire, and you are really, really penny pinching, you have a $25 million apartment, in Manhattan, in Midtown Manhattan, or in the Upper East Side. That's the same amount of space, the same kind of apartment can be had just over the river in New Jersey. And it's always been like that. They could always have moved to New Jersey, and they could be paying $5 million instead of $25 million or $1 million in a lot of cases. So if they were really so thrifty, they would be investing in moving to New Jersey, but they're not. They simply aren't. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of cost to move their business holdings from New York to New Jersey. Some people do it. Surely some people will do it, and they'll be used as the example. But why did Jeff Bezos want to come to New York so badly a year ago if, he was in danger of losing everything?
Now, when people are going to Florida, and I think Goldman Sachs moved to Florida, and many companies are going to Florida or other places. But what can we do to make our government make rent forgiveness happen?
I think it takes pressure. It takes pressure and political willpower.
How can we pressure them?
Well, what's really great is DSA has a big campaign right now, the Democratic Socialists of America. Their New York City chapter is working on a massive tax the rich campaign. And a lot of this, includes raising revenue through taxing real estate investments. And when we start to raise revenue and tax the rich, we're creating the revenue that can then be used to do things like cancel the rent, or make public broadband a basic right. I mean, so many of our students who are learning at home don't have access to high-speed internet. And so every time you want to introduce a social program that's good for the people, that's not even radical left. That's a basic thing you get in many European countries or in Canada. It's seen as socialist, and they say, "How are you going to pay it for
How
it?"
did
And
we
what
go from being so-called the greatest country on earth to being maybe the worst industrialized nation on earth?
Well, by changing the terms of the American dream and making it so that, we sold this idea that anybody could be a Henry Ford, anybody could be a billionaire, anybody could be Jeff Bezos. And so we're all playing the lottery, and nobody wants to upset the rules of the lottery because they might be the next one to strike it rich. But people who have a compassionate take about the people around them and have a connection to their neighborhoods and their neighbors see the value in supporting others. If I have excess food and my neighbor is starving, I'm not safe. I'm not happy. I don't have a community that's functioning. I don't have a community that's functioning until everyone's housed and everyone's fed and everyone's taken care of. And that's the basic part of having the basic part of the social contract of living in a society. But we've somehow allowed, we've somehow scratched out the thinking that, a society is built with roads that are created for public money. So when Jeff Bezos shifts, packages all over town, he's actually using free public roads everywhere he goes. And when he doesn't pay taxes, he's not actually contributing to the thing that he's using a lot of. But these things are so complicated and so removed from that basic American dream of having it all. It's the nitty gritty and the details. And we've prohibited ourselves from having creative solutions to these things by being distracted by the concept of getting rich, by the concept of value, by the idea of somebody like Donald Trump versus who he actually is on a day-to-day basis.
Uncouth, vulgar, infantile, madman dictator, yes. But, okay, in closing, we haven't settled anything because nothing can be settled in a half-hour
True.
show. But I hope you plan to run for elected office in the future, and I hope you win, and I hope your
Thank you.
ideas filter through the larger society. Are you a democratic socialist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
I believe we should tax the rich and we should provide people with basic human rights.
Sounds
And
perfectly
apparently that's the
reasonable
far
to
left
me.
socialist standing these days.
Yeah, and that sounds completely reasonable to me, and I think to any fair-minded person, even the rich, would say, well, yeah, that sounds right,
The rich are safer walking down the street when the poor are housed.
Yes, and aren't hungry, and aren't
Yeah.
enraged. Anyway,
When we're hungry and we're enraged, they're in danger.
Yes, indeed. And my guest has been New York politician, Mr. Patrick Bobilin, who we've been discussing rent forgiveness. As I said, we didn't solve anything because it's just a TV show and you can't solve things on TV. But if only we could.
I can tell you, Diana, we could all get behind the DSA Tax the Rich campaign, which has a lot of momentum and some support from elected officials.
Sounds great. Democratic socialism, the time has come, I think. And I know there's socialism. Oh, it was poisoned by McCarthyism. They said, oh, socialism is evil. Well, cave dwellers were socialists. People have always been socialists. You help your neighbor, you're being a socialist. Am I right?
Yep, Jesus Christ was a socialist.
My grandfather, who was a socialist politician in Spain, always said Jesus Christ was the first socialist. He wasn't the first, but he was one of many socialists. Anyway, as I've said, my guest is Peter Bobilin, New York politician. We've been discussing...
Patrick Bobilin.
Patrick, I'm so sorry. Why do I keep saying Peter? My guest is Patrick Bobilin, New York politician. I'm Louise Montford. No, I'm Diana Montford. This has been the Diana Montford Show. I love you. Even if no one else loves you, I love you. And listen, I mean, we the people, there are more of us than there are of anybody else. So don't despair, because just in sheer numbers, I mean, we win. Whatever it is we win, I don't know what we win, but I love you a lot, and I'll see you next time. Love you. Bye.